Yeah, so we always tell people when you're going to build a GPT, there's a couple different ways to do it. So it's either a prompt that you've used several times and you keep going back to and you know it has a lot of value, or it's a task that has multiple steps in it, or it's a repetitive task that you find yourself doing all the time. So those are kind of when you would create a custom GPT.
Welcome to the Agents of Change, the podcast experience you've been waiting for your entire marketing career. Search, social, mobile, AI, blockchain, and neuromarketing. These are the Agents of Change, and so are you. Digital marketing success awaits, and your transformation begins now.
Welcome to another episode of the Agents of Change podcast, the podcast that's all about helping you reach and engage your ideal customers online. My name is Rich Brooks. I'm your host. This is episode 568, powered by Flight New Media. Question: have you created a custom GPT yet, or a project in Claude? If not, you are in for a treat. If you find yourself asking ChatGPT or Claude to do the same tasks over and over again, custom GPTs or Claude projects are going to be a huge time saver for you. Going forward, let's just use the term custom GPT, as they're basically the same thing. It just depends on whether you're a ChatGPT or a Claude person. Now, these custom GPTs aren't for every task, and today's episode will look at when you just want to use a typical prompt stack or create a custom GPT and how to make the most of them. Speaking of AI, and obviously if we're talking about LLMs like ChatGPT and Claude, then we are talking about AI. I just found out that I'll be speaking at CEX later this year, the Content Entrepreneur Expo. I'll be co-presenting a 3-hour hands-on AI workshop with Malia Khan. We're still finalizing the agenda, but we're going to be covering how content creators can use AI to create better copy, better visuals, and even better podcasts. The event takes place on August 24th through 26th. That's in the year 2025, right in Cleveland, Ohio. Seems like all the great conferences are happening in Cleveland this year. You can head on over to cex.events if you're interested in grabbing a ticket and seeing some of the other speakers they have lined up as well. But for now, let's get started on some custom GPTs. My next guest is an author, award-winning international keynote speaker, and consultant. He's been optimizing digital content since 1996 and has created online training programs for dozens of companies. He spent the last 8 years focusing on data analytics, digital marketing, and content strategy. And since 2021, he's been diving into AI, Web3, community building, and the metaverse. He wrote Epic Content Marketing for Higher Education and co-authored the second edition of Epic Content Marketing with Joe Polizzi. He's the host of the AI for You podcast, and that's U with the letter U for university, which focuses on practical AI implementation and use cases in higher ed institutions. When he's not creating data visualizations, he teaches wingsuit skydiving and spends time with his wife and 6 children. I don't know which of those statements is more incredible. Today, we're going to be looking into creating your own custom GPTs with Brian Piper. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, Rich. It's a pleasure.
And of course, we had a nice little conversation about snowboarding right before we hit the record button. Before we get into the meat of today's topic, let's talk about wingsuit skydiving. When and how did you get into that?
Well, I started skydiving 35 years ago in the military. And then back in 2001, I was with a buddy of mine in Norway doing some base jumping, and we saw a guy take one of these squirrel suits off of the cliff and have like a 30-second flight while we were getting, 10 seconds. And I said, I got to figure that out. So then, then the next time I had an opportunity, I bought one of the wingsuits and have been doing it ever since. And now I like teaching other people how to do it.
Tripling your ROI overnight. So do you, at the end, you pull a chute, or do you take the squirrel suit all the way down?
No, you still have to pull a parachute at the end to land. I mean, if you want to land soft and nice and go do it again, yes, you need the parachute at the end.
Otherwise, it's one-time use. Okay, I get it. So starting with the basics here, let us know, what is a custom GPT and how does it differ from just using prompts in regular chat GPT?
So basically, a custom GPT gives you the opportunity to create a mini model within ChatGPT that you can train and personalize for your specific use case or task. So basically, you're just creating a smaller instance of ChatGPT that's specialized for a specific type of project or task that you want to do over and over again.
So if ChatGPT is all powerful, all knowing, omniscient, as it's sometimes made out to be, why would we need a more focused version? Why couldn't we just ask these questions the way we ask any questions in a prompt?
You absolutely could, but you need all that setup. You need all that exposition at the beginning to be able to say, all right, I want you to act like this, and here's all the information, and here's all the data. So, for instance, I have one that I use for personal use that's a meal planner, helps me figure out, what the family is going to eat for the week. And I've got it all customized with like the appliances that I have, how I want it to answer, the format we're going to go through. It even gives me my shopping list in the order that I shop in my grocery store. And that's all because I've uploaded like a map and the picture of the aisles and, traced my route. So these are all those personalization things that you can add into the instructions and into the supporting documents. So now every week when I need to go figure out what we're eating for the week, I don't have to go back and find that prompt in my prompt library, or I don't have to go grab that super doc and upload that into a new prompt. I am basically training this very specific use case within ChatGPT so I can just go to my culinary creator, click on that, and just ask it whatever questions without needing to give it all that background.
All right. So if we have a task that we're going to be doing multiple times, possibly it varies a little bit, but that's when the custom GPT really shines. Is that
Yeah,
what
and
I'm hearing?
especially, yep, absolutely. And especially if you need to give it a lot of context. So you could do it with just a prompt in your prompt library for very short, quick, simple things. But anytime I want to like add more information about our brand voice, or I want to give it all of our strategic priorities, and I want to give it this list of, different websites that I want to have it go check out to get background data on. You can just put all of those in the instructions for the custom GPT, and then you don't have to think about those every time you want to go use that. You just know that it already has all that information in it.
All right. Now, are there any downsides to creating and using custom GPTs, or are there any use cases where they might be less effective or the outcomes would be less desirable than just using a standard prompt?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about custom GPTs is you need to work on them. You need to refine them. You need to keep going back and testing and iterating on them. I mean, and especially as the model updates, you need to go back in and make sure that now with the new model, with the new update, it's not making mistakes or not answering your questions the way that you want them to. Sometimes you'll give it very clear instructions, especially if you tell it not to do something, it will intentionally do those things. So sometimes you have to play around with like taking part of your prompt out and then republishing it and then going back in and putting that part of your prompt back in and saving it again. So, they can be a little bit more work sometimes to refine and get them just right, as opposed to just a standard prompt that you can use. But I find them to be incredibly valuable once you get them fine tuned. And then as new features come out in the models, like when the Canvas feature got added to ChatGPT, you're able to just go into your custom GPT and just click on that checkbox and add that new feature into your custom GPT.
All right, that's nice. Now, we've talked about ChatGPT or custom GPTs quite a bit. That's from ChatGPT. Are there equivalents in like Claude and Gemini and any other popular LLMs that are out there right now?
Yep, absolutely. So Claude has projects, which are different than ChatGPT projects. So Claude has projects and Gemini has gems. And those are basically ways within those other tools that you can build these custom personalized little mini models. Gems gives you the opportunity to kind of play with the background a little bit more. So if you're more on the developer side of things, that might be a better option for you, where you can go in and you can adjust the temperature or the chaos level, or, the different attributes of the model itself. Whereas in ChatGPT, you're kind of given just the basics of ChatGPT. It doesn't give you a lot of that background, but they're very easy to build, very quick to build. My wife and I were cleaning out our basement, and we had all these items that we needed to list on Facebook Marketplace. And it would have taken us hours to manually do each one of those one at a time and, write the description and the title and figure out what the price was. And I made a custom GPT in about 30 minutes. And then all I had to do was take pictures of each of the items, and it went and did the research, wrote the descriptions, the titles, figured out what the other items like that were selling for, gave me a price, and then it actually put it all in an Excel file that you could just upload to Facebook Marketplace to list multiple items at one time. So I was able to list 40 items in about 20 minutes.
Wow. And then you got 400 people who immediately message you and say,
That's right.
Is it still available?
That's right. Absolutely. Once we get that automated, then we're really going to save some time.
Exactly. So putting on my small business owner hat or my marketing hat for a small to medium-sized business, what are some of the more common use cases that I might be interested in terms of custom GPTs?
Yeah. So one of the great things that we see a lot of businesses use is creating a custom GPT that simulates your brand voice. So you can train it on a bunch of your writing or your website or your blogs, newsletters, whatever, so that then when you need a new idea, it can help you write a draft in your brand voice using the language that you're used to using. So a lot of times that can be very effective. Same with emails. So like at the university, we have a lot of emails that go out from different leadership areas when something happens on campus. So now we can start off by getting a first draft of that message in the leader's voice. And then that way the approval process usually happens much quicker because it's in the language that they're used to using, that they've used in all their previous correspondence. Writing proposals, creative briefs, job descriptions, all of those things that are time consuming. And, you need to provide the input about the specifics of the job. But when it comes to the formatting, the structure, all those sorts of different things that you have to spend your time crafting and putting together, it can spit out a first draft of those really quick, and you can just go in and tweak and adjust and correct things before you finally release it. So those are a few good use cases.
Yeah, and I can imagine if you have multiple people writing for you and you've created a custom GPT for brand voice, as you were saying, that you could also use it for editing. So if I've got 6 different people on my team, or if I'm using some outside consultants and they're writing for me, I can kind of feed it through there and it can give me a version that is more in alignment with my own brand voice, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have multiple people across like your business that are creating content for you, if they use that custom GPT, then everything will kind of start out right out of the gate, sounding more similar, more consistent, more in your brand. So it'll take less time on the editing side downstream for sure.
So as we're talking through this, I want to make sure that people understand how they get to this. Can anybody use custom GPTs? Does it require a certain level of chat GPT? What do you call those, pay tiers or whatever it would be? And where exactly do we access it if we want to create our first one?
Yes. So if you want to create a custom GPT, you need the plus version. So that's the $20 a month version. And then you can build as many custom GPTs as you want. If you want to use custom GPTs, you can use public custom GPTs just with the free version of ChatGPT. You can also use versions of custom GPTs that people publish and they share the link with you. So you can set the share status of your custom GPT that you build to only be available to you, or you can have them be unlisted, which means they're not public GPTs. But you can send anyone you want that URL, and then they'll be able to go in and use your custom GPT. Or you can make them public, in which case they go into ChatGPT, OpenAI's library of public GPTs that you can use. So those are the ways that you can share them. So you could have one person on your team that's responsible for creating new custom GPTs, and then different members of your team testing those out, trying them. And when they need changes made or when they need adjustments to the model made, they can just go back to whoever made those custom GPTs and have those tweaked and changed.
So when we're in our paid version, of ChatGPT, where exactly are we going to see where we can create them, and where are we going to be able to see kind of like the app library, so to speak, of everybody else's GPTs?
Yeah. So when you're in ChatGPT, over on the left-hand side where all your prompts are, right at the top, you're going to see Explore GPTs. So when you click on that button, then it takes you to a screen where you can either search for all the public GPTs that are available, or up in the upper right-hand side, you're going to see another selection that is My GPTs. So any custom GPTs that you have created. And then you'll see another button that says Create. And then you click on that, and then it'll take you into the creation process.
All right. Now, you mentioned that it's a little bit of an iterative process to create a really good GPT. Sometimes you who are very experienced in this, it might even take you half an hour. Can you kind of walk us through like what steps should we be taking if we're about to craft our first GPT?
Yeah, so we always tell people when you're gonna build a GPT, like there's a couple different ways to do it. So it's either a prompt that you've used several times and you keep going back to, and you know it has a lot of value, or it's a task that has multiple steps in it, or it's a repetitive task that you find yourself doing all the time. So those are kind of when you would create a custom GPT. And then you have to start thinking about, all right, what are the goals? What are the objectives that I want this GPT to deliver at the end? You want to be very clear up in the front of your instructions. I'm going to be asking you to create a Facebook Marketplace listing for items based on a picture. And then you establish the workflow. So you have to walk the GPT through, here are the steps that you're going to take. Here are the things that you're going to create, the outputs that you're going to deliver at the end. And then you give it as much information as you can, as many examples, as much data, as many resources as it needs to be able to create the best output. And then you start testing. So initially, you can test within the tool without publishing it. So you're just kind of figuring out if it's actually going to give you the results you want, but none of the data that you input or none of the examples that you use within those tests within the custom GPT are actually saved in your prompts. They don't actually start getting saved in your prompts until you publish that GPT, until you actually create it. Then you can actually go in and start using it and getting output, and those will show up in your prompt menu.
Is there any way to reverse engineer someone else's prompt? If you see a custom GPT you really like, is there a way to find out how it was actually made so you might repurpose it yourself? Or is it more kind of like that's in a black box and you might be able to guess at how they did it, but you won't be able to kind of see the recipe?
Sometimes you can just ask other custom GPTs. So it used to be when they first started coming out with these, you could ask custom GPTs for all the files that were used to train it and what the instructions were for it, and it would just give you that. They don't give you that anymore.
Probably best.
Yeah.
Probably for the best.
Yes, because people were uploading their entire books, multiple copies of their of different books that they had to train the model for their own little custom GPT, and then people were just getting the free copies of the books from grabbing those. So yeah, they locked that all down. But a lot of times you can just ask the model, like, what are the workflow steps we're going to go through? What types of information are you using as resource data? So a lot of times you can get a sense of how the custom GPT was created from those. But a lot of times you just have to use the tool. And then if you want to duplicate that, you could start experimenting with your own model.
All right. Now, you mentioned another time when we were talking about a 10-point scale you use to refine these GPTs. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so a lot of times you're going to have a GPT that will either be more enthusiastic than you want, or it will have a higher level of humor in the output than you want. So what we'll do, instead of going in and saying, use plain language or don't be funny, we'll say, on a scale from 1 to 10, I want your humor level to be a 6. And then you'll look at the outputs. And if it's still too funny, then you go back in and you say, now I want your humor level to be at a 3. So you can kind of give it a scale like that, and it will adjust itself up or down incrementally based on that scale. So there are a lot of different attributes you can add in there to adjust. But if you find something in the tone or the voice of the model that's not being effective, or if it's not giving, if it's hallucinating a lot, you can say, I want you to turn your creativity level down to a 2, and I want you to turn your specificity level up to a 9. So those are the sorts of different attributes that you can give it based on the feedback you're getting, the output you're getting.
Brian, is there like a master list of these attributes, or are you just kind of using your own personal sense of style or your own ideas about how to tell it to be funnier, which I don't believe it can be funnier. It may try to be more humorous. It's never going to be funny. But can you is there a master list, I guess is my question.
I don't really have a master list. It's really situational based on if there's a general part of the output that I don't like. If I think that it's trying to be too humorous and trying to put too many jokes in there, then I'll use that as the gauge of, whether or not to increase or decrease it. So it's very situational depending on what the output is and what you're trying to adjust.
And as far as you know, there's no master list at OpenAI that they've created with like hundreds or thousands of different attributes that basically could be toggled on and off for 1 through 10.
No, it's not like Midjourney that has very specific
Okay.
attributes. Yeah, no.
And then the 1 through 10 rule or the 10-point rule, is this something you've come up with? Like, what if I said from 1 to 100, or is that something that's kind of hard coded in it's 1 through 10?
No, I think you can use whatever scale you want. I got that idea initially from Ethan Mollick, who's a Wharton professor, AI expert, posts a lot on LinkedIn. And he was saying that that's one of the best methods to use to adjust the output instead of just saying, don't be so funny, or try to be more, try to use more plain language in your outputs.
Now, at Flight, I have my own personal Plus account, and then we also have a team account for everybody else. There's just things that I don't feel comfortable sharing with the rest of the team, which is and I started first, so that's why I have my own one. What are some of the ways, or what are the best practices for being able to share custom GPTs with your team so that we're all using the same playbook?
Yeah, so if you have a ChatGPT Teams account or an enterprise account, that's even easier to share it, because then you can just share those custom GPTs with other people on your team. So you don't even have to make them like unpublished. You can actually just keep them you can share them either only by yourself or with your team, or you can make them unpublished or private. And that's actually what Moderna did. They bought GPT Enterprise for their entire 6,000 person staff, and they gave them all access to that. And within 2 months of adopting ChatGPT Enterprise, they had over 750 custom GPTs across the company. So people were not only creating custom GPTs for themselves, but they were seeing other custom GPTs that other teammates had created that helped make their job easier. And so then they were looking for opportunities to collaborate together and create these custom GPTs that would help everyone at the company.
All right. Now, I'm sure a lot of businesses make mistakes when they're first getting into custom GPTs. What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen that companies make when they start entering this arena?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is just not testing enough. I think a lot of people, when we first came up with our meta description writer for website pages, we have a bunch of different SEO custom GPTs that we've created. So one just writes meta descriptions, and we came up with it. We tested it a couple of times, and then we sent it out for a bunch of people to use. And we started getting feedback about it making up things that were on the page. So then we kind of developed a process when we were testing these things, and we kind of came up with a workflow of, we want to do at least like 10 or 15 experiments with a variety of different types of content, different types of output we're looking for, and kind of pressure test it a little bit more before we start releasing it. And now we release it internally to a small team to test it. And then once that testing comes back and we get those adjustments made, then we release it to a larger internal team. And depending on the prompt, then sometimes after that goes through some testing, we'll release it publicly.
I want to backtrack for a second because you mentioned something about how people would be putting up their books and things like that to custom GPTs. Are there limits on the amount of data that it can manage? Because it seems to me like I've heard different things. And in fact, I recently had a book that I was uploading and I asked it, I'm like, how many pages in a row do you think you can actually work with before you start forgetting things? And it said 50. And I said, okay, let's do it in groups of 50, summarize each one, and then set those aside, and then we'll work out the whole book together. But so what are some of the limitations as we're putting up more and more documents to these custom GPTs? When should we know that enough is enough? And how do we know if we've gone over?
Yeah, so within the actual instructions themselves, you're only allowed to put in 8,000 characters. It's an 8,000 character limit in custom GPTs. But you can get around that by creating like a PDF document or, a Word document with all of your instructions in it, and then upload that as a resource. And then within your instructions, just say, use this document as your instructions.
Okay.
But you're limited within each custom GPT to 20 files to be uploaded, 20 different resource files.
So if I want to get more in there than the 8,000 characters, and I do have a book, if I've got the book as a PDF, can I just say, read this book before you answer every question, or just make sure you're familiar with this book? Like, how exactly does that work? And is that a legitimate cheat code?
Yes, absolutely. So I have uploaded copies of my books as PDFs into ChatGPT. There's a 512 megabyte limit per file. So you can have up to 20 files, up to 512 meg per file. And then pretty much anything over that, it's just going to tell you, you've exceeded your limit for file size or for the number of files you're creating.
Okay. So getting back to, like, you had mentioned a few GPTs, and a popular one would be his brand voice. And another one I know would be buyer persona. So if we wanted to create something where it was always going to look at everything we wrote and say, is it or is it not in your brand voice? How to improve it? But also, is it written for your ideal customer persona? Would that be two separate GPTs, or could you create one GPT that was trained to review all content you were about to send out and then provide recommended edits based on those two things, buyer persona and brand voice?
So we would create them as separate GPTs. So we would have one that was our brand voice, and then we actually have multiple different GPTs for each different buyer persona that we have, whether it's potential undergraduate student, international student, potential faculty, all are different custom GPTs. But then what you can do within ChatGPT, you can @sign within just a regular standard prompt. You can use an @sign and it'll bring up a list of all of your different custom GPTs, so that then you can ask it some questions about the content that you're working on. You can open up your brand GPT. You can @sign that and say, does this content fit within our brand? And it'll give you feedback on that. And then you can @sign one of your personas and say, is this content relevant to you? How can we change it? How can we adjust it to answer your questions, solve your problems? So that's how you kind of can do these like virtual focus groups with multiple different personas, or you can bring several different custom GPTs together. So we'll do that with our SEO GPTs. We'll have an article that we're working on. We'll have it write the meta description, have it write page title options, have it go through and optimize the piece of content for specific keywords that we're trying to target. But each one of those is a separate custom GPT that we'll reference.
So you've created basically an assembly line GPT here, where basically you might require 5 people in the real world to do this particular task because they each have specialties. You've done the same thing, replicating it in AI, and then you're basically just adding them or tagging them to bring them into the process, to bring them into the assembly line to get that final output that you're looking for. Correct?
That's exactly right. And this is really setting people up to have the mindset that we're going to need when agents really start hitting the scene next year. So agents are able to string multiple tasks together and access different tools, different browser windows, those sorts of things. So like I always see custom GPTs as the training wheels for agentic AI.
So as we're crafting this, are you putting that into a new prompt, or are you going into one of your custom GPTs to start this assembly line? Like when you said you were tagging the different chat GPTs, can that be from a new prompt, or does that have to be in a different GPT?
It has to be in a new prompt. You can't actually prompt a custom GPT from within another custom GPT. You have to be in a root level new chat GPT prompt, and then you can bring in whatever custom GPTs you want.
Excellent. Okay. So that's how we can assemble our assembly line and we can do a whole bunch of things right in a row. And like you said, that's probably in the future going to be something that'll be taken care of by agents, but maybe that's the conversation we'll have next year. I also know that one of your favorite GPTs is to repurpose content. So can you kind of just walk us through what that looks like, how you kind of make that all happen, and then what the output looks like?
Yeah. So as we're creating content, we're always looking back on existing content that we have that's performed well, that's worked really well for a specific audience. And then we want to make the most use of that because your content is really a product, right? It has value, has long-term value. So just because it worked really well for prospective undergraduate students 2 years ago doesn't mean that it's dead and has no life anymore. So we'll go back to those high-performing pieces of content. We'll put them into our repurposer GPT and say, what other audiences, how could this content be used for an international graduate student audience? What channels are they most likely to find this content on? And it'll give you information about that. And then you can say, all right, now, based on all that information that you gave me, take this content and convert this website story into a 20-second TikTok script. And then you go to one of your international student interns and have them kind of reformat that into their voice and their language and then deliver that content. So we're looking at existing content that we have and looking at how we can repurpose, retarget, and redistribute that on as many different channels as we can for whatever audiences those are going to work for. And then we make sure that we're tracking the performance of each one of those. So we're getting a lot of value out of the content that we've already spent a lot of time working on. It's already, it's all original, brand new content. And now we're putting it out there for different audiences and reusing it.
Now, is this all text-based, or are we at the point yet where we can upload an audio file from a podcast or a video file and have it work on that? Or do we always need to move things into a transcript first before we start playing around with it?
So it depends on the tool. So some tools like Gemini has huge context windows that you could upload entire videos to. ChatGPT, you can upload audio files to, but I still tend to go with the transcript just because they tend to be more accurate if you go to a third-party tool to get the transcript than if you let ChatGPT do it. I'm sure that's all going to, continually be evolving and adjusting. But most of what we're doing is taking our text, our website content, and figuring out how to repurpose that because that's where we have the most data around content performance. That's where we tend to have the most content already existing. Depending on your brand, depending on your content that you've created so far, you may have a ton of YouTube content. Grab those transcripts, figure out which videos are performing the best, grab those transcripts, throw those into ChatGPT, or take the video, throw them into Gemini and have it ask it questions about the content that you have there.
Interesting. Now, if someone's listening right now and they have not yet started with custom GPTs, what's one actionable piece of advice that you can give them, or one simple custom GPT that they could create to get started?
I always tell people I started out creating custom GPTs for my personal use, my personal life. And I've got about a dozen that I use every week, and they save a ton of time. And just by going through that process, and it's not something that I feel like I have to share with other people at work, or it's not something that I'm like, I don't know if this is really going to improve my performance at work. I haven't tested it out enough. But if I'm just playing with it by myself at home, I mean, my meal creator, I've got thousands of uses on it in the year and a half since I created it, and it has saved me a ton of time. So figure out something that you do in your life that's, repetitive or data-driven, whether it's your workouts that you're doing, if you want to add some variety into those. I've got a custom GPT that looks at the weather for the week and helps me figure out what cardio I want to do. So lots of different options in there, but I'd say start with something personal, start with something easy, experiment with it. Once you create your first few, you're going to start getting a feel for how easy they are to build and the power of them.
Awesome. Brian, this has been fantastic. If people want to learn more about you, check out what you've put out there, where can we send them online?
You can go to brianwpiper.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn at Brian W. Piper and most social channels.
Awesome. Brian, thank you so much. Really appreciated talking to you today.
Thanks for having me on the show, Rich. I love the content you create and all the knowledge and insights you share.
For a full transcript of today's interview with Brian, along with the show notes, the links he shared, a blog post about it, and just everything that you would need to get the most out of today's episode, head on over to our website at theagentsofchange.com/568. I really like Brian's advice on getting started by creating a GPT for personal use, but if you're more business task oriented, then you should create a GPT for your business or for your marketing. There's no wrong way to do it. It's just about getting used to the tool. One of the first GPTs I ever created was called Raging Muse, and would create sarcastic poems in a Gen Z slang about any topic you gave it and create an image that showed its disdain for the topic. Is there any value in that? No, except as an exercise for me to use the tool and to get used to it. Do that. If you have the paid version of ChatGPT or Claude, create a custom AI tool that does something, and do it this week, no matter how rudimentary it is. And if you have a friend or a colleague who's been struggling with AI or ChatGPT or Claude specifically, or mentioned to you over cocktails that they'd really like to create their first custom GPT or Claude project, because, that's the kind of cocktail conversations we have these days, then do us all a favor and share this episode with them. Send them the link or hit the share button in the podcasting app that you're using right now. Embrace the future and become an agent of change.
Don't miss another thrilling episode of the Agents of Change podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform.